Chris Bowen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Graham.
Now, your policies seem to be costing this country a lot of money. Every time we put someone in detention, it costs. What's the current bill annually for refugees?
Well, it's not just when you put somebody in detention, Graham. It's expensive regardless of how you do it. Offshore processing is expensive, detention centres are expensive, community processing is expensive. The figures will be in the mid-year economic outlook, which will be out very soon. And they're always updated, and it's always a transparent process there. But it is very expensive, and that's one of the things that I say when governments are deciding how to allocate their money. When people are arriving in big numbers on boats, it's money that's not being spent either processing people in camps around the world and bringing them to Australia or doing other things.
But we're talking more than $1 billion a year now, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
This is a very significant sum, particularly when you've got this wafer-thin, some might say gossamer-thin surplus. You could eat that surplus up all on your own.
Well, we'll deliver the surplus, but of course, yes, it's expensive, and the more people that arrive, regardless of how you process them, there's some people say, I'll just get rid of detention and it'll save all this money. That's just not right. It doesn't work that way. Processing people's refugee claims is expensive, and that's why I think a much better way of doing it is stopping these boat arrivals and processing more people in different countries and bringing them to Australia. It's not only fairer and safer, it's also, of course, a better use of money.
But what's the process? I mean, I keep reading and hearing that people ditch their passports. They seem to go overboard before they come to our shores. So how do you process someone? It's really just a blank page. You don't know who this person is, where they've come from, what their background is, what crimes they've committed or haven't committed. You just don't know.
Well, it's a challenge, but we have obviously built up a lot of expertise doing this. We do a lot of biometric testing. We check people's fingerprints and other biometrics, and we get matches often, not often, but we do get matches to people who have claimed asylum in other countries, for example. So the Department of Immigration and institutions like ASIO and the others are now quite well advanced in determining identity and determining people's backgrounds, both for their refugee claims and determining whether they are genuine, and then all those other checks that go into determining whether somebody gets a visa.
And how long does all this take? Because I think the claim that's always concerned me, because there is, I have no doubt, some truth in it, that mental problems and difficulties arise when you keep people in detention for very long periods of time. So how long do you keep them in detention? What's your average?
Well, the average these days is about 3 months for people who arrived pre-August 13. It was much longer than that, but we've made a lot of reforms and we've got it down very substantially. We moved families and children out as a priority, but the average length of time in detention is around 3 months for those people who arrived before August 13.
And what are the overall numbers? How many are we saying tick and how many are we not?
Well, that goes up and down, and I introduced a system whereby we release those figures once a quarter and we break it down into different groups. So, you know, what countries they've come from, for example, and including the primary decision and then the overturn rates at the Refugee Review Tribunal. So it does move around quite a bit because it just depends on what group of people have arrived over what period, and you do see it moving. We've seen a big increase in Sri Lanka, for example, of arrivals over recent months.
And the boats seem to be coming direct from Sri Lanka down. They're not necessarily stopping off. Before we get to Sri Lanka, though, Indonesia is obviously pretty topical with what's happening there. Most of the people coming to our shores are coming out of an Indonesian port. I mean, there are so many Indonesian ports, I don't think we can sit here and start nominating which one, because there are too many. But are we getting more cooperation out of the Indonesians? Yes,
we are. We've been working with Indonesia closely for a long time. We do a lot of law and order work with them, disruption of ventures. So before a vessel even leaves Indonesia, we do work with the relevant authorities on disrupting vessels. That's not something we issue a press release about every time we've done it, but that work continues. But as you say, it's just really dealing with the symptoms. It's not dealing with the cause. Indonesia's a huge archipelago. They can leave from hundreds, if not thousands, of various embarkation points, and trying to actually stop it that way is only ever dealing with the symptoms and never dealing with one small element of the problem.
That's what worries me, because even if you had full cooperation with the Indonesians and they had half their navy out trying to stop these boats, they're still going to get through. You won't stop them all.
Yeah, absolutely. With the best will in the world, with the best cooperation in the world, we're dealing with very sophisticated, organised criminals, people smugglers. I mean, you know, these are very sophisticated rings which we deal with, but it's not some mar and par operation, and it does take a lot of effort to do that law enforcement, that disruption. We do it, but this is my point, Graham. Doing that only ever is dealing with the the symptoms of the problem. To deal with the problem itself, you've got to take away what they're selling. What they're selling is a visa in Australia and all that goes with it.
They're selling permanent residence in Australia, essentially. Now, how do we stop that? Now, it seems to me that we've tried most things now. I mean, Malaysia didn't work because the parliament...
No, well, Malaysia wasn't allowed to work.
Well, the
Malaysia wasn't
pass, and I'm acknowledging that. Don't worry, I'm not going to verbal you here. That's sure. What happened, and I understand that. But you did agree to Nauru and Manus Island. Now, my understanding is there's more than 4,000 have come since we announced we're going to do it. But it hasn't obviously therefore worked as a deterrent because they're still coming. 4,600 I think was the figure I saw. I think that's roundabout right. And so far you've only sent 300 up there.
326, and we're seeing an increase in the tempo this week. We've seen 2 transfers this week. There'll be another transfer this week, so we are seeing an increase in the tempo. But I've always, it's a bit ironic if you like, Graham, I've always said you need to be doing a whole suite of measures. You need to be, Manus Island and Nauru, I've had this conversation with you in the past, by themselves are not a deterrent. There's been a certain irony to Mr Morrison and Mr Abbott jumping up and down saying, oh look, Manus Island and Nauru aren't working. Of course, you need to be doing everything. If you look at the Houston panel report, they said, we'll do Manus Island and Nauru, do it differently, do a no advantage test, where we're doing that, increase the refugee intake to 20,000 so people can see that there's some hope of getting to Australia a different way. They don't need to get on a boat to come to Australia. We're doing that. We've already seen people brought to Australia under that. And do Malaysia as well, and do a whole heap of other things. Now, we're doing all those, but of course we'd need parliamentary approval to do Malaysia. And the benefit of something like Malaysia is that it actually is a very clear message. With Manus Island and Nauru, with the best will in the world, you are saying if you're a refugee, you will eventually get to Australia. You'll have to wait a long time. If you're honest about it, you're saying that, and that was the experience last time. As much as Tony Abbott might want to walk away from
more than half got in then. Do you expect, let's say, first, I must make the question first, how many can we fit on those 2 places?
1,500 on Nauru and 600 on Manus Island.
So there's only 2,000 anyway. We've already got 4,600 who've come since.
Well,
so how many of that 2,100, when they get there, how many of those would you expect to finish up in Australia?
Well, it depends on your approval rates, and of course our no advantage test means that even though you're regarded as a refugee, you won't get a permanent visa in Australia. You won't be brought back to Australia until you would have if you hadn't got on the boat in the first place. That's a very important change.
That's a long time.
It can be a long time, that's right. So that's one of the challenges.
Does that mean that you've got detention for a long time?
Well, they're not actually, you are able, particularly on Nauru, to move around Nauru, but it's a small place.
Mate, stick me on Nauru and I'll call it detention.
It's a very small place, I'll grant you that. But you will see some move through. We've already seen some people go back to Sri Lanka. Yet small numbers compared to the arrivals. I grant you that.
30 or 40, isn't it?
About 40. And I think, well, you know, obviously we talk to people about their options for going back all the time. But that's 40 more than we would have seen up until now. So you will see some transfers through. Yep, we've got a challenge on our hands managing this 4,000 and whoever else arrives. I freely acknowledge that. But it's very important. What we're in here is a battle with the people smugglers. So that means a couple of things. Firstly, we need to keep our communications efforts through the region in the source countries and even increase them, and we're doing that. We need to show the lived experience to actually say, look, this is what's happening, you're being lied to. And you're seeing that with those Sri Lankans who've gone home, who've said to Sri Lankan media when they arrived, we were lied to. We didn't get what we paid our money for. Don't come. I mean, they've said that themselves. Through the Sri Lankan media outlets. So we need to do a lot of that, increase the tempo of the transfers, show that there's permanent structures going in on Nauru and Manus Island, and that we're serious and showing resolve. As well as that, we need to do those other things, like increasing the intake, which we're doing, and Malaysia, and making the family reunion changes, which I've announced, and actually show that we are serious about this and implementing it.
But even if we do, I mean, at the moment, at 4,600 since you announced it, it isn't working. And by the way, I thought it never would. And I know it wasn't your preferred option either.
Yeah, well,
I've never thought it would work. But if that's the case, why don't we get the temporary protection visas? That seems to be the only difference now, apart from Malaysia, which isn't going to happen, obviously. Why is it that you haven't introduced them?
Well, temporary protection visas are a moot point under the no advantage test, Graham, because if you're saying to people, you're not going to get to Australia until you would have if you hadn't got on the boat, where does a temporary protection visa fit into that? It doesn't fit in at all. Is the Liberal Party saying, well, we'd actually bring people back from Nauru earlier and give them a temporary protection visa? We'd bring them to Australia before they would have got a visa under those arrangements? well, that's reducing the deterrent, or are they saying we're going to leave you on Nauru for several years under the no advantage test and then give you a temporary protection visa? And if people are coming in numbers, knowing that they're running the very real risk of being sent to Nauru or Manus Island, do we really think that over and above that, with no family reunion rights by the way, do we really think that over and above that, then that the option of some sort of temporary visa with work rights and with limited welfare rights is going to be a disincentive? Of course it's not, and the history teaches it.
No, but see, this is the problem. I agree with you. That's the problem.
Yep.
And that means we don't have a solution. What that means is neither side of politics can come up with a solution that will work, that we are going to keep getting these people.
Well, we've shown plenty of flexibility in trying to get something done here. As you said, this wasn't my preferred way forward. I proposed the Malaysia Agreement, negotiated it painstakingly with Prime Minister Najib and Minister Hishamuddin in Malaysia, went to Malaysia 5 times I think it was to negotiate it, actually got an agreement with a country in our region. You know, Tony Abbott doesn't even bother to turn back the boats with President Yudhoyono in his meeting. We actually got an agreement with a country which is very important in our region, and we need to be able to implement that agreement. And we're showing flexibility. We're saying, okay, we don't have all the answers here. We'll do Nauru and Manus Island as well.
You ain't got the numbers. It's not going to happen.
Well, if
that Senate is never going to pass.
Well, if the Liberal Party were fair dinkum, they would say, okay, you've done the right thing. You've backed Manus Island and Nauru, and you're doing all these other things, and we'll give you the chance to implement your policies. I'm not saying he should endorse it. I'm not saying he should think it's a good idea.
If you know it won't happen, what's next? There's nothing left.
Well, all we can do, Graham, is prosecute the case about what will work. Now, all the advice to us, right from the beginning, is you need something like Malaysia to actually to be a deterrent. You can do the other things as well, and they're important. Nauru and Manus Island are important. They do provide a pretty clear message that you're not going to get to Australia in the time frame that you wanted if you get sent there. But you need to be able to do it all. And
the problem, Minister, is you're going to have to whack them with a carrot because they're not going to give you the stick. I'm sorry, I could go on all night, but we do have to leave it there. Chris Bowen, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Graham. Nice talking to you, mate.